Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode of Hormonally Speaking. I wanted to do something a little different this week. This is actually something I've kind of been wanting to do for a while, but it really has come up for me, at least in the last week and a half, because I definitely was very much impacted by the school shooting last week, and with the understanding that these school shootings have been going on all year and they've been going on for many years, but there felt or feels like something different, maybe a different level of it striking people, and sort of the real deep pain and sadness that I'm seeing. And that's just one of the many things, obviously, that has been going on for so many people. I'm seeing deeper issues when it comes to health stuff. A colleague and I were just talking yesterday about post-COVID issues, how that's particularly kicking up gut stuff for people. And there's actually just a recent study that shows that, in fact, and we're going to talk about more of that on a different episode. But the point of that is there's just so much going on, right? And I think that at least I was really feeling that we need some grounding in everything that's going on right now, and some hope and some maybe guidance of where to go forward at this point. So I brought on three of my good friends and colleagues, Jen and Sarah and Diotima. Welcome, you guys.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Yes. So we're doing a little bit of a round table discussion about some of these big questions. So we're just kind of flying by the seat of our pants with this. We're going to see how this goes. But basically, I'm just going to throw out a question, and whoever wants to get started in answering it can do that. How does that sound?
Great.
Sounds good. Okay. So what are your takes on what is happening on both, a global level and personal level for women right now?
I love this. I'm always the one that's like, I'll jump in. This is
like
Sarah. Yeah. So I love the question, collectively and then personally. So I love what we're doing today. We're doing this roundtable. We're doing collaboration. So it's not just up to Christine or Jen or Diotima or Sarah to have all the answers and know everything to do and be going it alone. I think the days of going it alone are obviously over.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing, we got collaboration going on. We're modeling it here. And then, we're, I think, looking for networks. We're looking for places to belong, to form community. And then individually, I see a really big theme of sovereignty. And my work has always been about sovereignty, but more and more in the last few years, really going into, energetic sovereignty, financial sovereignty. Like, our energy is actually our own. And so when we know that and operate in that way, a whole host of things change in our lives, because we're not just reacting to what's going on out there, but we are knowing who we are and standing, in that truth and in that energetic. And then it's like we're less easily swayed by what's going on in the collective, because I think what's going on in the collective has been crazy for years, and it's not really getting any more, it's not getting any less crazy, let's say it that way. And so, big times of really big shifts in consciousness happening right now. And, some people are going to react differently to those shifts in consciousness, but they're all opportunity. So the more that we know who we are and the more we are aligned to that sovereignty, I think we're going to be okay. So sovereignty,
I like it.
and then finding your tribe, like sovereign, find your tribe. Yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, that's awesome answer. I love that. Who wants to go next?
Well, from an astrological point of view, I would have to agree with you. I would say that what's going on right now with women, particularly in the USA, has very much to do with empowerment and claiming our power, which frankly, although, feminism has been happening for well over 100 years now, we still don't have enough power. Frankly, we still don't have an equitable amount of power in society. And I think that it's getting to the point, and frankly, I think the recent Supreme Court leak of that document may have galvanized us to recognize the fact that, yeah, we've been kind of going along, well, we don't really need to worry about the fact that, everybody's still tottering around on high heels, and mothers are still more responsible for childcare than men, and all of the really misogynistic stuff that happens, not the least of which are some of the shootings that happen in the world today. And we're like, well, we're getting there. Not anymore. We're not going to get there unless we get out there and we say, no more, absolutely not. You cannot do this. You cannot do this to half the population. And that's what the astrology is talking about. But I'm telling you, we're going to have a lot of upheaval getting there.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive deeper into the astrology here in a few minutes, if you're okay with doing that, because I'm very interested, I think, as many people are, of what's on the horizon. Jen, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so for me, I'm going to speak more to the individual here, because I feel like they've spoken about the collective. So the way that I've been processing this, and my clients and people in my world have been processing this, is burnout, grief, and accessing grief. And I really appreciate how, because the last, the hundreds of years of patriarchy and all these things have impacted us, and there is something to grieve. And I think there's power in that process as well, of letting it move through us, to access more of our power, more of our light, and I think also, and I feel almost emotional as I say this, I think that there's not enough recognition of how much COVID has impacted us. And I don't mean the actual sickness. I mean the impact on society, economy, relationships, connection, health, just because of the mental health piece, partly, there's so many things that have changed, and we're still digesting, absorbing, adjusting to, and in it, like my world is still, yesterday I was in a group text with the group I'm in tomorrow night, and like there's all these, like so-and-so might have it, do we move this, do someone do Zoom, like it's just a constant dance with all of it. And then there's so much change all the time still. Like my gas station that I always go to for 7 years closed for a while because I couldn't find staff, and it's like, okay, like that's another little thing. And those things add up, it just opened up again. And I walked in and told the guy, I am so glad you're back. And so there's also an opportunity for a different level of connection. But we have to claim that. We have to be vulnerable and claim that, and be willing to, let our nervous systems expand as much as they can through all this, and, connect. Because I think also, everybody else is already saying too, that's really the key in a way.
Absolutely. And, just to add on to that a little bit of the sort of personal health perspective, COVID obviously impacted in terms of how, people getting COVID, how it impacted their health. But this reality of, major sort of sweeping changes that happens to the body, whether you got it or not, honestly, for pretty early on within the first few months, my colleagues and I were talking about how we started seeing, just for example, higher levels of H. pylori showing up on GI maps, and it was like, what is this from? It wasn't even necessarily people that had COVID, but it's like, oh, the stress impact was kicking that up, right? And then as time went on, these other things that we started seeing, and as people, get it, and the changes in menstruation and et cetera, and it's like, oh yeah, this is a deep overhaul on the basic physiological level of almost all of us by the time it's all said and done, right? I mean, I believe that we will all have COVID by the time it's all said and done. and how that dealing with that and dealing with all of the other sort of chemicals in our environment that have been there for years and continue to be more, and how some of the things that have been taken away that from protections from these things, that we have even more of that actually that we're dealing with on a daily basis now than we even had a few years ago. And so all of that, along with the disconnection from our communities, and trying to re-engage with that, is palpable, particularly if you are definitely watching the news all the time or tapped into all of that. It's so intense on our systems. And I really do believe that we have to each find our own way of, for our own selves, figuring out, being tapped into what's going on, but not overly so. And that in all levels of our work and our play and our, just understanding what's happening in the world, because it's too much. It's just too much, right?
Yeah.
But we can't turn a blind eye either, so figuring out what that is for yourself. And one of the things I would say, is just reading one of my colleagues, she's like, I'm taking 2 weeks off and I'm disconnecting. And I can't say enough how much I recommend that. Never in history were we this connected to technology or what's going on in the world or any of that. And we just, our systems cannot handle being tapped in all the time. So that's my take on that. And I know that's hard, but even choose weekends where you literally do not turn on your phone. You do not open up that computer. So that's a little bit tangential there, but I think that it's an important part of re-engaging with ourselves and our intuition and what we have in terms of strength inside, because otherwise we just don't have any strength left to help change things in the world. So
and we have to put on our own oxygen masks, to use the somewhat overused metaphor. First.
And I think that a lot of people hear that and they think they're doing that, but they're not doing that. They really aren't, because there's been so many expectations placed on women forever, but now it's like even more stuff all the time. It's like you have to handle all of these things. And it's like this is where, Jen and I are going to talk soon about some boundaries in our upcoming webinar, but this is where boundaries become hugely important, and really sitting down and figuring out your own boundaries, right? Good. So what are some of the ways that you guys see where things are heading?
Should we just keep going around?
Yeah. Go for it.
Okay. I think we're in a consciousness evolution, and I don't want to lose sight of that. I want to remind us of that if we're just looking to the news or to what's going on outside of ourselves, to piggyback off of what we were just talking about, we're going to feel very frenetic, very reactive in the nervous system, very confused, very off center. We are going to give our energy to things that are demanding our energy versus giving our energy to things that are of our own choosing. And if we're talking about changing the world and we're talking about changing the way of life for women, then we have to come back into, again, our sovereignty over our personal resources. And I've been talking about this differently. So when we think resources, we often think of the things outside of ourselves. But I really want to encourage women to think about their inner resources first. And this goes for me hand in hand with creating boundaries. And so what is getting your inner resources? So by that, I'm talking about your attention, your life force energy, your time, your body, like your body's energy, and what's getting that first versus and the way that I teach it, you can draw like concentric circles on a piece of paper and draw, yourself just in the center, because in the center, it's like just you. Nobody else gets in that circle. Nobody, it's like you and the divine. And then out from there, who gets to be a part of your world. Like, what gets your resources? Because we only truly have like so much time in a day, so much life force energy, especially depending on, you know, things like our human design, how much energy we have to, you know, to spare, and, you know, and our preferences. And so just what's getting that? And if you are on your social media or, you know, at work or listening to the news, or just if you're constantly taking things that are, you know, highly stressful to you and allowing them close to you, then that's a great place to start to reorganize like what gets your resources. So I think that's just so huge. And then we can move into, you know, a conversation that's kind of a bigger deal about how do we grow our resources as women, right? Because we don't grow our resources as women through like the hustle, the grind. Christine does a great job of talking about this on the podcast. We, you know, those days of being in that masculine orientation, my work is primarily about the feminine and masculine archetypes and how we really are coming into consciousness and rebalancing those within our own bodies. You know, like if we don't like the way things look in the patriarchy, let's start with our own energy and our own bodies first, and our own actions first. And so we can really get into a deeper conversation about like how to grow our resources once we know where they're going. So it's not just always like we're like pushing things away or keeping them at bay, because that takes a lot of energy, right? But when we're really clear in who we are and what we give our energy to and what we don't give our energy to, then our energy can actually grow. Like we can actually have a surplus, you know, rather than like constantly being on that depleted recovery train. And that's what the world wants of us. Like that is what was happening to the feminine essence, to the feminine energetic, like in the planet, in us, for thousands of years. Like it was just taking advantage of that life force energy of the feminine. And so if we want to see things change and we really want to like steer this ship, it starts in us with our own allocation of energy.
Absolutely. And I just want to comment on that. You know, I talk about this a decent amount on the podcast. I probably don't follow it as well as I should, but following your cycle, you know, if you're a cycling woman, following your cycle, if you're in menopause, you can still follow the cycles of the moon. And that is so much of our feminine essence, right? Of that sort of ebb and flow and that give and take. And when we have the energy to be out there more in the world, and when we are better, you know, in a place of connecting to our intuition, which can give us so much information for the next, you know, round of being out in the world, and how, you know, particularly hormones can be so off when you don't follow this cycle, right? It's like, this is a literal inside of us, can't change it cycle that's going on.
Right. And even throughout the day, we have cycles, you know, like there's a wave of energy for me throughout the day where, you know, like I have more to exert versus I need to reserve more. And one thing that I've been talking about on Instagram is that I really want us to get away from using the feminine as recovery. Like using the feminine to rest after we've already crashed and burned. And so, you know, can we flip that and like put our meditation first, put our movement first, and get our intuitive hits from that, and then, you know, do the masculine thing of putting it into action after we have our clarity from the feminine.
Absolutely. And I think that also speaks to finding your own pulse throughout the day and your own energy throughout the day, because we do, most of us, push on that masculine scale, right? Of just, we should have this level energy throughout the day. And if we don't, because majority of us don't, we're going to use caffeine or sugar or something to jack it up. Right. And I mean, I totally do it sometimes too. I get it. You know, we feel like with deadlines, but the more that you get into, that's another boundary, right? And another boundary that you can create for yourself of knowing, okay, if this time of the day is not good for me in terms of like my brain shuts down, you know, So what does it look like if every day I do 15 minutes of meditation or deep breathing or something during that time, and how that can change the whole rest of your day afterwards?
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's so important, because we have to get out of that mindset of we have to push through the day, and I know that not every woman can make that choice, that she's at work, what have you, but there's lots of little spaces, I think, where people can fit things in, when they start to think about that. Yeah. Diotima, you want to share your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with Sarah about the expansion and change of consciousness that we're going through right now, and that's very much backed up astrologically. And I also agree with the cycles. And I think that one thing that we can do as women, one of the things that is absolutely coming in the years ahead is climate change. And all of that is, I mean, even this year so far, the temperatures in India have gotten so high that people and animals were dying in the street.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's really important that we all start to focus more on nature. And that is something that we can do. We can follow the cycles of the moon. We can follow the cycles of the seasons. And we can do the best we can to connect with nature, because nature is not something out there. Nature, I'm an animist. So I think that everything in nature is alive and conscious, although to a degree, it's not, does not have human consciousness, but it is conscious. And I think it's important for us to tune in more to the natural world, because the natural world is going to become more and more important to us. And all of this technology, the thunderstorm that's outside right now is interfering with my internet connection. And it's going to get worse and worse. So I do see a lot of technological failures in the future that are going to be due specifically to climate change. And I think that the more we understand that nature is incredibly complex and conscious and requires our conscious interaction with us, with it, the better, the more able we're going to be to handle climate change as it occurs. And in my experience, women are much more likely to be able to accept the concept of nature's consciousness. So I'm thinking that that's one thing that we can focus on, as you say, following the cycles of the moon, following the cycles of the season, the solstices, the equinoxes, the midpoints in between. I think that's all very important. But what I do see happening too is an extraordinary amount of upheaval and social unrest. And there is this need for some of the people in this world to absolutely repress women and women's needs. And so I think another thing that we need to be very conscious of is internalized misogyny, which is not just, and I'm not just talking about us. I'm sure that most of the four of us have done a lot of work on that, and we at least understand what internalized misogyny is, and are likely to pick it up, to see it when it happens within us. But I think if it weren't for internalized misogyny, Hillary Clinton would have been president, and a lot of other things would have happened. And I think that we have to recognize that some women work against their own interests. And it's important for us to be compassionate towards women who do that and understanding, while at the same time trying to educate and point out how society needs to change to make sure that women have all of the opportunities that they need to help build a better world.
Absolutely. Well, it's, interesting sometimes. And I know the word feminism brings up so many different things for so many different people, but how that word will, I know some women that are just very against that word. And they don't necessarily see, because of the different ways it's been talked about, of all the work that came to be able to have them, have the rights that we just take for granted every day by all those feminists for 40 years that worked so hard to get us here,
Yeah. Raising my hand here.
Yeah, you're like, that would be me. I'm one of them.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, it's fascinating how that can happen. And I understand that words get tweaked and meanings get tweaked. And so it's easy to have people's minds sort of not see that. But I agree with what you're saying. It's like, we have to, just like every white person has to understand their racism, their inherent racism, and then also if you are a person of color, the internalized racism that can happen too. I mean, these things are so prevalent in our culture that we have to really like pick them out and be aware of them.
We have made some extraordinary movement forward. I mean, I was born in 1952 and I was legally not allowed to have a credit card until I was 23 years old.
Right.
I could not go into a restaurant or to work wearing pants. I had to wear a skirt, and it was the level of repression of women was really extraordinary. And I don't think people, I think that one of the things that the Supreme Court decision did was it woke a lot of younger women up to what is possible. And a lot of us second wave feminists are going, no, you just don't understand how bad it can get.
Absolutely.
And I'm hopeful that wake up call will really key a lot of change, the change that I see coming up. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to change.
Right. I want to swing back really quick to your point about nature too, because I thought that was really fascinating. I was reading the other day about this person working on heavy metals in their body, right? And so I know as a practitioner, and I know as myself too, a lot of times we're digging into like, okay, what is the thing that is throwing my health off? What is it? I've done this, I've done that, okay. So there's deeper things, and you just keep searching for like this thing, right? And absolutely heavy metals impact, mold impacts, all of these things. But this one person talked about they did this deep chelation. I don't know if you guys know about chelating heavy metals, but it can be really, really intense on the body. It doesn't always work. Sometimes people do it for years, but it also is necessary in some instances. But this one person talked about doing chelating stuff for a year, and they were like, I didn't feel any better. It just made me feel worse, because sometimes when you like mobilize all the heavy metals in your body, if it's not getting out properly, it's going to make things worse. And they wrote down what ended up bringing them out of that and making them feel the best. And they were like, number one, circadian rhythm, like getting hardcore about, like no blue light past 8 p.m., like in bed by 10 p.m., like really truly making that sleep time the most important thing, right? That was number one. Number two was grounding, getting their feet literally in the dirt every single day, and then they went through a list of some other things too. But I was like, that's such a reminder that our bodies are nature, really. And for millennia, we were directly connected in those ways that keep us healthy. It's like, look at the sun first thing in the morning, you wake up, that's going to help your adrenals, go to bed, cut off the technology, cut off the blue light, by this certain time, and get that deep sleep. Sometimes we need some help with that deep sleep. I know that well too. But it's amazing just making those kind of, I don't want to say minor changes because it's really hard for people, but like you actually can't supplement your way, chelate your way, do any of these other things without getting those foundations in check. And that's really going to make the biggest difference. And most of them are free, So yeah. All right, Jen, your turn.
Okay, I've been taking notes and I have a lot of things. I'm trying to figure out how to prioritize. So I love what Sarah was saying about the inner resources. And I think because we don't know what's coming, that's so imperative. And I, for me, I've been distracted by social media so much lately. I need to pull that back. And also grounding. I went for a long hike on Monday, 2 days ago, 3 days ago, and I laid on the ground for a while on top of a mountain. And then yesterday, in the middle of my workday, I took a blanket and I went and sat outside on the ground for like half an hour and laid on the ground and cried on the ground. It's just like totally like letting everything like be grounded and connecting into that. And I've had times in my life where many years ago I had multiple car accidents and within a couple of years, and my nervous system was wrecked. And I couldn't sleep in my house almost, but I could go to a park and lay on the ground and go to sleep. Like there's so much there that is so priceless, that is way underestimated. And I had the grounding sheet with this silver in it, this plugged into the grounding. Like I'm hardcore about the grounding. And I just want to mention creativity as a resource, because I feel like it speaks to all that we're talking about. It speaks to our autonomy, our expression, our connection to nature, possibly. Like there's so many ways, and there's so many ways it connects us to ourselves. And it's something that we've always been doing for, the whole existence of humanity, is making things and creating things with our hands and everything. And we're disconnected from that quite a bit. So like whatever it is, like whether it's like dance or drawing or any simple thing, it makes such a difference as well. So I just wanted to name that, because creativity is such a really powerful and free resource as well, that can be tapped into. And just to reiterate, like the difference between feminism versus toxic feminism. I really appreciate that distinction, because they're not the same thing. And for being for something versus against something or whatever, I mean, there's a dance there with that energy, but just naming that there's, a range of energies within that. And that this opportunity that we have to see the things that we don't want to see that are still there under the surface, like misogyny and racism, all the isms, and it's like, how do we allow it to be and see it and acknowledge that more people are waking up, and then do like a ho'oponopono, like to the part of me that's created that or living with that, or, is that, I love you, I'm sorry, forgive me, thank you.
Yeah, it's such a powerful prayer, and I don't know if everybody wants to call it a prayer, but yes, it's
practice,
powerful practice and words. And I really like the creativity aspect that you brought up, because I often don't like pull it into what I call my foundations, but it really is a foundation, right? I mean, if you think throughout history, in some of the hardest times in history, creativity is what got people through it, right? It's like art is what got people through it, like being able to make connections via creativity, or just processing your emotions via creativity. It's probably I mean, like you said, free, and the best way to actually do some emotional processing,
even cooking, like, creatively, because that's something my whole life, I was always so busy. In the last few years, I've slowed down, and I enjoy cooking now. I never really saw myself as somebody who enjoyed cooking. I saw myself as somebody who enjoyed eating. And I feel like it's like this shift for me of this like more connection with the feminine, honestly, too, and the earth. And that changes everything for my health, because it's a different relationship with that practice of food and sharing food and making food and, all the things, and harvesting wild things. Like that's a new thing for me too. So there's so much potential
there is
with simple things.
Yep. I saw something the other day where it was like on a TV show, and she looked down at this, plate of food, and she's like, it's so hard to believe that this was just ingredients a few minutes ago, and it's like, yeah, it is a magical thing, right? To cook and to bake, and like for a completely different alchemizing thing to happen in that process from what you started with. And that's why, I mean, in cultures, you know, like Italian cultures and Greek and all of that, like, I mean, food and French, it's like, that's been such a part of the joy of life, right? And I think what's so important right now too is to find joy where you can,
Yeah, absolutely.
as much
And
as
I'm
you
going to
can.
take that creativity piece a little bit farther. I believe that that is the purpose of life.
Mhm.
And I lay out the argument for that in my book in some detail.
Mhm.
But basically, I think we're not here to prove ourselves to some God in heaven. We're not here to suffer. I believe that we are here to create and to learn how to create more fully with our consciousness. Because while I am not the, oh, wave your magic wand and we create, the BMW in the driveway the next morning or whatever. But I really do believe that consciousness is the basis of reality, that consciousness creates reality, and that we are part of that consciousness, and that we all conscious beings on this earth contribute to the reality that we inhabit. And so I think that the kind of creativity that Jen was talking about with the cooking and the dance and that is what fires up our inner creativity. And I think it's really, really important.
And I feel like
What
that circles back to what Sarah was saying about sovereignty too. You know, it's like
It absolutely does.
coming into the self. Yeah. Sorry, Jen, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak more to that. The creative process is a big deal to me. It's how I see business. I talk about it in my TED Talk. I talk about it in my life every day, because I see that the feminine way of creation is not building, it's, allowing and growing and nourishing. And I, for me, one of the biggest things that I've noticed is that I am constantly like dancing with my ego about like an illusion of control or delusion of control. and I
like
What'd you
that.
say?
I'm stealing that. The delusion.
So usually delusion.
yeah. That's my
or
point.
illusion.
Yeah. And so for me, I am being just like slammed down sometimes into acknowledging the being in the process, and I have no control, and I have no the levels of planning or strategy or that, all the masculine stuff, like it's not there. And I'm just like, okay, I'm just in this process, I'm gonna go lay on the ground today. And that's where I'm at. And it's like, and I think that is a really important thing to acknowledge, that we don't know exactly what's coming. And so how do we resource, and how do we trust the process and step into the process, acknowledge the process, and acknowledge that things are different than they were a couple of years ago, as far as how things work and energy and how we work. And, the strategies that I had for my business years ago don't work anymore at all. Like, we're in a different world. So it's okay, now what? And I don't even know sometimes. And so I'm just like, okay, let's just see. Let's just see. Like what Sarah was talking about, the feminine, like coming from that place of meditation and like getting the insight that comes from rest, from a Hakomi's perspective, like, okay, allowing that to come and then stepping into it, even if my brain or my ego are like, what?
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's still so much of it, especially because all of us have our own businesses, right? And so I think it's actually probably even more important for us to model to our clients and people in our lives that A, we don't have control, that B, we're following our cycles, we're following our energy levels, because our energy tells us a lot about what is happening to our health, and not going into, this is something that I've done for years, like going into panic mode when I don't have all the energy all the time, that's okay. And to really allow my body to rest, as much as she needs, and that's so hard for so many of us to unwind from. And I'm so glad that we're talking about this today and that all of us are sort of on the same page around that, because I do think we need models. We need many more models of that.
Can I speak to that quickly? I want to voice that even knowing what I know about feminine masculine, like I, was still in the overly masculine, even as an entrepreneur, even as, it's like old habits die hard, right?
Yep.
And so disassembling this, from my activities, from my consciousness, and then reassembling what it does look like has been a long road. And I really do think that a lot of us are living it so that we can teach it, right? Because the new ways are coming. But I also want to say for many of us, the old ways will not work anymore. It's like you cannot get away with it anymore. And so if, you are trying to like start your own soul business or, do it differently, to kind of, I'll say, regress back into an old hustle or an old patriarchal way of being, or that internal misogyny takes over, it won't work.
Right.
And I've really learned this over and over and over again in my business. Like if I am not following this internal strategy of masculine, feminine alchemy, if I am not listening to what the divine is telling me to do, if I am not in right relationship with my own resources, my money won't flow. Like the clients don't come. I'm stuck, And so if you find yourself pushing or, trying to kind of go back to the old ways of being and they're just not working, I really think that many of us right now, in this female entrepreneur space are actually learning the new ways to begin to lay the foundations for what those new ways will look like. And if it's not working for you, you're probably a way shower that is like trying to figure out a different way.
Yes.
But we need to be led and stop the, trying to have control over that. I really wanted to normalize that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Well,
and I think what you were saying keys into what we were talking about as far as control is concerned too, because we can't, there are some things obviously that we can control, and a lot of those are within us, things that we can control ourselves. But there's also the fact that the whole more masculine thing of trying to control what is outside of us ignores that keying into the zeitgeist, where, I used to ride a lot, and you cannot control a 1,000-pound animal. You can just dance with it. And that's what we need to do, is dance with the creation around us, what everyone else is creating. We have to key into it. We have to know what's going on. We have to understand how to go with the flow so that we don't control, but we direct. And we put energy where flow some energy where we want things to move to, which is not the same thing as gotcha.
Right.
That
kind of control.
Right. It's this very delicate balance. Determining. I just want to speak really quick to, I think Jen and I might have already talked about this, but one of our colleagues, Megan O'Malley, I was very impressed because she got on social media and she said, why I'm quitting social media. And, for this foreseeable future. And she went on, for like probably 5 slides explaining exactly why, because she said, it felt like a dysfunctional relationship of like giving so much to it and not getting anything back. And I was like, yes, talk about leading, right? She's trusting herself and her gut that that's just not working for her anymore. And she's moving, in this way that is against everything that any, quote unquote, successful person in our current society would say do, but I was like, I felt the power in that. And like, I've been playing around with the idea in my mind too, I'm not quite there yet, but I think that is speaking to what Sarah said, like that is us like finding our way and really just being like, if I know it inside, I got to do it. It doesn't matter what anyone else says, even if it's a million people coming at you saying, this is how you should do things. Right. So pretty powerful.
So I'm thinking about that masculine, feminine alchemy, and I'm working with a lot of like female entrepreneurs about what that looks like inside of us, right? But I actually want to talk about what, like, an external example, because I'm in a new love relationship, and I think you'd be okay with me sharing this. But so we're practicing some consciousness about polarity. So, he's going to hold the masculine polarity in the relationship. I'm going to hold the feminine polarity. Like, that's nice when that happens. And so, this notion of, like, I've done so much work as the man, as the masculine, I'm just going to show up. And, like, the way I show up is going to, like, kind of control the situation, or, like, because I'm, conscious, and we do this internally as well. Like, because I have the idea and I execute it, we think, like, well, everything's just going to, work around that. Like, I have my shit together. It's conscious, like, right? And it's so interesting because and I do it inside of myself, but to watch it in this relationship dynamic right now, it's like, the feminine has loads of wisdom, and he wants to know that wisdom. And so as soon as we started this relationship dance, he was like, well, that control thing is out the window, because, we're not used to tapping into the well of wisdom of the feminine. And this is one of the things that we're awakening to, bringing back now, that the feminine is so infinite. Like, the masculine is consciousness. It is the decision maker, it is the structure, but it's not controlling or dominant. Right. And so there's, like, such a wisdom and an intelligence of allowing that masculine to, like, make decisions. But in my TEDx, I talk about, like, this cycle of, tapping into the feminine to get the wisdom. And then that's actually what informs the masculine making the decision. Right. So, cycling through that, like, in our day, in our processes, in our relationships. Yeah.
I think it's a really important point of, that masculine and feminine within ourselves, and working in that, like you said, like, I mean, especially as entrepreneurs, because it's like, we have to tap into both of those in order to make things work.
1,000%. Like, there's not even another way. Right. So the consciousness of what these two archetypes are is, like, up to us to figure out.
Absolutely. And that goes back into the cycles throughout the day, really. And even the menstrual cycle, again, like, near ovulation, that is a more masculine time. Literally, our testosterone is higher. That is when being out in the world and connecting and doing things, if you are trying to push a project out, that's a really good time to do that. Versus when you are bleeding, it's a great time to go internal and really assess everything and get really clear on what's, working in your life and what's not working in your life. So it's so powerful, those energies within each of us. And then obviously within our relationships in the world too. We could go on and on forever about that. I know we're coming close on time. Oh, were you going to say something? Sorry, Diotima, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say we could, but
but with the time, So we've talked a little bit about what women could do, to move towards a more positive future for all. But does anybody want to, throw anything else out there that we haven't covered yet?
Vote.
Protest,
vote, do magic if needed.
I think for me, the thing that has been my stretch that's helped me through this stuff is being more vulnerable, which is the opposite of control, and it's way more constructive. It's like, so that's my stretch, is being more vulnerable. And it's a practice. And I think that, these kinds of conversations and being real about things is really, really, really important.
And to add on to that, I have a friend who, this kind of goes back to the work thing again, because she's also an entrepreneur. And, she's sort of written these different things about the struggles that she's been through, but then sort of how she's in this fixed place now. And she was wondering why it wasn't, like, connecting with the audience as much. And I said, I really think that we're in a time now of authenticity and vulnerability, right? And to be authentic, none of us have it all together. All of us are on our path of healing, you know, like we all are still dealing with some shit we were dealing with 20 years ago, you know, like the reality, like
60 years ago.
60 years ago. I mean, and I talk about this a lot to clients, and I have to remind myself, you know, there's something I learned in my master's program about the spiral, right? And the idea that your core wound or wounds, because I don't think we have just one, sits at the bottom, and that, you know, we do the work on it, and then we come on the other side of the spiral. We're like, we're done. It's over. We've done all the work. And then it comes back around and hits that core wound again, but it's a level up. Right. So you're just like, why am I back here? What is going on? I thought I worked through this. And it's like, you don't ever work through it all. It's always going to be there. But every time you go up, you know, in the spiral, and you take everything that you've learned the times before and you work with it in a different way. And there's beauty in the acceptance of that, instead of our cultural, like, done with that, move on, you know, because it can cause more pain, honestly, if you think you're done with it, moved on, and then it comes back around for you to work with it again. So I think that authenticity, you know, and being vulnerable and being real about that with, if you are in a place of having your own business and sharing, you know, with people listening to you, to be honest about those things.
Oh my gosh, I just did that hardcore on the
That's so
Sacred
true.
Remembering podcast yesterday. I shared some shit.
Is it about the gut one?
It's about the gut.
I haven't
and,
listened to it yet, but I saw it.
To the gut, and it's just my story. It's like I had a vulnerability hangover, big time. But I'd love to answer the question, because I was brainstorming knowing that this question was coming, and I want to take us back to like thinking kind of broadly about the shift in consciousness that's occurring and about sovereignty. And so both of these are kind of like a mental reframe that I really think helps elevate our consciousness. So two things that women can do, right? One, I really want I want to invite women to begin to reframe that we're not trying to catch up to men. We're not trying to I'm not trying to be equal to men in a patriarchy. What we're doing is like disassembling what wasn't working and creating new paradigms of unity. So the constant orienting toward men, or trying to catch up to men, or trying to get men to understand or convince men, waste of energy, right? Like we're going back to sovereignty and inner masculine feminine union. And then like, we're not fighting against something. Like that's such a waste of energy that really is such a root cause of women's depletion, is like the fighting for equality, fighting for, you know, equal representation. It's like, what happens if we just decide to be it in our own lives and our own energy? It starts to become true. So any opposition, any fighting, any polarity is actually ultimately a waste of energy if we continue to do it. So that's the first one. And then the second one, I love what you just said about like the layers of the onion, kind of like we're always cycling back around. I just came back from this 4-month cycle around my core wounding and this, you know, these eclipses, and it was a pain in the ass, right? So that happens. However, there's another consciousness reframe that I want to invite us into, which is we're not constantly healing. I think we choose, okay, it's like two choices to simplify this. Am I broken and constantly healing? Or am I sovereign and pulling all my pieces back to myself? I'm calling all of the parts of myself to myself because they're already mine. And so we're working on integration, right? Not perpetual healing, because just that mindset, like if I feel like my gut's broken, or if I feel like my ability to, you know, love is broken, or have money is broken, then I'm always seeing myself as separate from the wholeness. And I'm in a hustle for wholeness, right? And so the mental reframe of I am sovereign, I'm calling all of these parts back to myself. What do I have to do? And then I'm going to be shown the way. Like I'm going to be shown the way by my soul, by the divine, because I'm working like in those, really they're 12th dimensional frequencies. They're the unity consciousness frequencies. And so if I'm standing in the truth of who I am, I'm going to experience that the world is like working with me, right?
Mm-hmm.
So much more than if I feel like I am struggling to become whole. And I started sovereignty sessions actually in my business, because I was having so many sessions with women where, like, when I started talking about sovereignty and teaching energetic sovereignty, they were like light bulb moment, like just whoa, like total reframe that changes from, I'm broken and I have to constantly heal myself to catch up to like wherever I'm supposed to be, versus I am me now, and I choose to stand in the truth of who I am. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I think in a lot of ways that actually, what Diotima was talking about, and, what we've kind of talked about, joy and creativity in life, like that is being in that place more, right? If we see the wholeness and that we're calling things in, we're going to be able to access the joy and the creativity much more than if we're fighting against ourselves, essentially.
Right.
That's what it is. A lot of times when we think something's broken, we're sort of, autoimmune disorders are a perfect example, right? It's a manifestation of sort of fighting ourselves, fighting, different parts of our bodies. And so, I really love that viewpoint shift there. So thank you for sharing that.
It's massive. I think it's life-changing.
Yeah.
It's so life-changing. Yeah.
Jen, do you have anything you want to add?
I'm taking notes. This is good stuff.
She's like, I got my notes down.
Yeah. And it's funny because I feel like my healing journey recently has changed, and it's been very vivid, like soul retrieval, like my 4-year-old, my 12-year-old. And it has been exactly that. It's like very clear, fast, like, what's this? Okay, let's figure out what's there and call her back. And it's been really quick and powerful and empowering. And I think that the self-help mentality of like, oh, I have to constantly whatever, it's like, no, I love the paradigm shift Sarah just talked about. And it's an empowering paradigm shift, instead of like something is wrong with me, I have to, and that's also, and more women are into self-help than men, so it's also like self and it's a misogyny, internalized misogyny as well, because it's like, oh, I'm not whatever. It's like, yeah, you're not a freaking person who's overly masculine, in a female body, so
yeah, absolutely,
because most of our trauma, a lot of I'll speak for myself, like my traumas are all about being female. Like, and so it's like either my voice or there's a whole long list of the things, so and I know I'm not alone in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have sorry, somebody gonna say something?
No.
Okay, Diotima, I did want to ask you one question about astrologically, what's sort of a few years down the road, because I've been reading a little bit from a couple of different astrologers that we really are moving into sort of the women more in places of power by like the end of this decade in particular.
I would agree with that.
Okay, I was
But
like,
would
are you
also
seeing that
say
too?
There's a whole hell of a lot of upheaval coming around, and we need to be ready for that. And that's why we need to be strong, and we need to stand up for our own rights, because that's the only way we are going to create the new society. And yes, I would agree that we're going to have a big say in what this coming society looks like.
Nice. Yeah.
Which is going to be very different than what we're living in now.
Yeah. I definitely have also read about the climate change being, essentially the number one issue that there's no way to get around by the end of this this decade.
The elephant in the room. Everyone wants to talk about going to Mars and buying Bitcoin and all of this sort of thing. It's like, no, really, we gotta fix our home.
We're way past time needing to focus on it. Yeah, absolutely.
And since we women have culturally and been focused on the home for so many thousands of years, now we're expanding our concept of home to the planet, and that's to make our home.
I love that. I'm going to end on that note because I think that was very inspiring for me personally of a vision forward, right? It's like we've kind of talked today about like doing the work internally within ourselves and then that showing up in the world and creating the new world that we want to be living in and that we hope our children can live in, right? So I wanted to thank you guys so much for being here. This was so awesome.
Thank you.
You know, there was an intro in the beginning about all of you guys, but if you have anything coming up that you want to share, or, you know, Diotima, I know you have a book. I know both Sarah and Jen have TED Talks that you guys can point people to. So go ahead.
Yeah, for me, I have free gifts on my website and lots of resources and upcoming classes and programs for creative and holistic entrepreneurs specifically. So
you want to say your
my
website address? Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, it's Jen Ailey Coaching. So it's spelled JENALY coaching.com. And the gifts is just /gifts.
Perfect.
And I am an astrologer, and you can find me, my astrology and my book, which is called Touch the Earth, Kiss the Sky, at my website, which is uraniaswell.com, Urania being the goddess of astrology. So that would be URANIASWELL.com.
Great.
Wonderful. And for me, everything is at sarahpoet.com, Sarah with an H. And my cat just jumped on my desk to join us here. Speaking of the feminine making the entrance.
She's like, I'm here.
Whoa. So
Mine
yes,
just jumped up next to me too. Yes.
Someone, I think it was Andrew Harvey, said that like nothing is more feminine than a cat. And so she just made her appearance. So I have a free download there called Masculine Feminine Money. I'm teaching a class called Masculine Feminine Money coming up. And I am playing with some ideas about a women's spiritual business mastermind for women in years 0 through 3. Where I'm actually going to do a feminine pricing model that I made up, where it's like a sliding scale based on how many women join. And so we're working with those energetics of collaboration and masterminding and coming together to find new solutions. So that's at sarahpoet.com/sustain, but just reach out to me if you know that you want to be a part of that, because we're going to have to talk to each other through this different pricing model. I'm excited to see what happens.
I love that. Definitely let me know how that goes. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's just one of those intuitions that won't leave me alone. And interestingly, I go to a very wonderful man for energy work. And he was like, don't do that. You know, like 5 months ago, he's like, don't do that. And you know, I'm like, it's back. I'm listening. You know, it's probably innovative.
It makes total sense, actually. And it's come to my head a lot of times. And I'm like, how do I do that? So I'm going to watch you.
Yeah, I know. I was like, you be the leader in the situation and report back to us.
Because that really is the factor. That's the biggest thing for prices for groups is how many people are in it, you know, for lots of reasons. And so it makes total sense that it would depend on that.
Right.
Without you having to figure it out ahead of time, which is hard to do now.
Right. A masculine model would be like, I actually like a patriarchal masculine model would be, I want to get as much money out of people as possible. I want to prove that I have the capacity to hold these high prices, all that bullshit. And so I don't, you know, I'm all about integrity and heart in business. And so it's like, well, if I know that I need to make, you know, like if I need to pay myself $15,000 or $20,000 for this investment of my time and holding this space, then that's just what I need to make. And then the total number of people can determine like what it costs for everyone. So if there's 5 people, then it's $4,000, right? If there's 10 people, it's $2,000. So I'm going to try it. We'll see.
Great.
Yeah. You have to report back to us for sure.
Yeah, I will. Yeah. It's different. It's new.
All right, ladies, thanks again for being here with me today. I so appreciate this discussion. We may have to do it again in the future.
I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's so good to be with all of you.
Thank you so much. It's good to see you all.
Absolutely. All right, you guys, I will see you next time.
All right.
Take care.